The Gulf War, also known as the First Gulf War, began on August 2nd, 1990, and ended on February 28, 1991. This war was triggered by Iraq's invasion and occupation of Kuwait, followed by a military intervention led by a coalition of international forces spearheaded by the United States. The outbreak and progression of the war had profound impacts on the Middle East and the global political landscape. Following the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, Iraq faced severe economic hardships. The 8-year conflict left Iraq heavily indebted and on the brink of economic collapse. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein accused Kuwait of overproducing oil, causing global oil prices to plummet, which further exacerbated Iraq's economic woes. Saddam believed that controlling Kuwait's rich oil resources could alleviate Iraq's financial difficulties. Iraq had long claimed that Kuwait was historically part of its territory, a view that dated back to the Ottoman Empire. Saddam Hussein leveraged this historical context to justify his aggression, seeking both domestic and international support. Iraq argued that Kuwait had been unilaterally carved out by the British in the 1920s and should be reintegrated into Iraq. Saddam Hussein sought to elevate his status as a leader in the Arab world by invading Kuwait. He aimed to position himself as the champion of Arab nationalism and challenge the influence of Western powers, particularly the United States, in the Middle East. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi forces swiftly invaded and occupied Kuwait, declaring it the 19th province of Iraq. This action immediately drew strong international condemnation. The United Nations Security Council quickly passed a series of resolutions condemning Iraq's aggression and imposing economic sanctions. The UN also demanded Iraq's unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait. When diplomatic efforts failed, the United States and its allies began preparing for military action. On November 29, 1990, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 678, authorizing member states to use all necessary means to ensure Iraq's withdrawal if it did not comply by January 15, 1991. In the early hours of January 17, 1991, the coalition forces launched Operation Desert Storm, a massive aerial bombardment campaign against Iraq, marking the official start of the war. The coalition, composed of 34 countries and led primarily by the United States, included the United Kingdom, France, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, among others. The air campaign aimed to destroy Iraq's air defense systems, communication networks, military bases, and infrastructure. The aerial bombardment continued for 5 weeks, significantly weakening Iraq's military capabilities. On February 24, 1991, the coalition launched a ground offensive, rapidly defeating Iraqi forces. Just 4 days later, Kuwait was liberated, and a ceasefire was declared on February 28th. The ground war lasted only 100 hours, showcasing the overwhelming military superiority of the coalition forces. Kuwait's infrastructure was severely damaged during the war, requiring years to rebuild. Iraq faced severe economic and social turmoil due to sanctions and wartime destruction. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were displaced, facing shortages of basic necessities and social unrest. The Gulf War demonstrated the military and diplomatic strength of the United States in global affairs. In the aftermath, U.S. influence in the Middle East further increased, with American troops remaining stationed in Saudi Arabia, and the broader Gulf region as part of the new regional security landscape. The war highlighted the importance of the United Nations in maintaining international peace and security, particularly through international cooperation and collective action against aggression. The success of UN sanctions and military operations set a precedent for future multilateralism. Iraq faced severe economic sanctions post-war, leading to economic collapse and social instability. Saddam Hussein's regime remained under international pressure for over a decade, ultimately being toppled during the 2003 Iraq War. The post-war reconstruction in Iraq took years and left lasting impacts on its social fabric. The Gulf War had severe humanitarian consequences for civilians. Many Kuwaiti and Iraqi civilians were killed or injured during the conflict, and the destruction of infrastructure led to deteriorating living conditions. During and after the war, many families were displaced and in desperate need of international aid. The global community actively participated in humanitarian relief and reconstruction efforts to help the affected regions return to normalcy. The Gulf War was one of the significant international conflicts of the late 20th century, profoundly affecting the foreign and military policies of nations worldwide. It serves as a reminder of the need for the international community to work together to resolve disputes through peaceful means and prevent similar tragedies from recurring. The experiences of the Gulf War also underscore the importance of international cooperation, both in military actions and in humanitarian relief and post-war reconstruction.